All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and real quick, um, I just want to say thank you so very much for allowing me that little hiatus, if you will, through October, November, and December, and a little bit of January this year and last year. Um, I needed a little break for a while, and I was so busy with my other work stuff that it just made a few things impossible at the time. But I just want to say thank you so very much for being here and just following along and enjoying these based on true Bigfoot encounter stories. I absolutely love it. And back by popular demand, I'm going to try to get out basically two of your encounter stories every single month for you. Also, you guys wanted the website back up, and you guys really do enjoy the free giveaway. So here's the deal: you can get over to PacWestBigfoot.com, PacWestBigfoot.com, and once you get on the front page there, you can look right down below the main image, and you will see a little button there. You can click that button. You can enter to win. And as a matter of fact, Frederick, you are the winner for March. So, Fred, if you get an email from me, you are the right Fred, and you are going to get a coffee mug sent to you. So, there you go. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to just some great folks out here, Shannon Legro, William Jevning, and of course, Mike out there at Bigfoot's Wilderness. Did a little interview with him over there yesterday. Hope you guys don't get too mad at me. I talked a little bit. He asked me a little bit about cryptids and other cryptids and things like that. And I have my own views on that, and so I shared that with him. I also shared a little bit about my own experiences with Bigfoot here in the Pacific Northwest. So you can check that out on YouTube and his podcast over at BigfootWilderness.com, BigfootsWilderness.com. So let's get on with this. I don't like to share any sort of advertisements. I don't mention people in or things like that except for this one right here. But I don't get paid for it. It's not a paid advertising. But a lot of people ask me real quick before we get in the story, ask what kind of coffee you drinking, Dave. Well, I drink Sasquatch coffee, Squatch coffee over at squatchcoffee.com. Absolutely love it. Gunner and his whole crew there, from Mr. Corson and all of them that are out there on the trail. I'll tell you what, it's just awesome. And Gunner's coffee over there is just spectacular. So that's what I drink. So let's take a sip real quick, and we're going to get into this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. This one is literally close to home, by the way. The Parrot Creek Bigfoot. There's a Bigfoot on my property. Well, you know this place, Dave. You walk up this way every morning. But just so you know, about 2 years ago, my husband and I started to realize there were Bigfoot up this way. I've seen you walking up the road here almost daily on your morning walks. That is why I stopped you that morning to tell you what I'd seen early spring about 2 years ago now. It was Bigfoot, 2 of them, and we'd finally seen them after we had realized from a few experiences out here that was the only explanation of what it or they could be. Here's what happened, and thanks for listening, Dave. The Parrot Creek Bigfoot. We live about 4 miles up and out of the town of Roseburg. You know this, Dave. You walk this road every morning, and after about the millionth time of passing by you on the road on my way to work every day, I thought I recognized you. What a small world. But here is my encounter story I shared with you that morning. As I said, the wife and I live outside of town, on the very outskirts and fringes of Roseburg. It is actually outside the city limits, up to the very top of the surrounding hills in Parrot Creek itself. Having a Bigfoot around this close to town is still a bit unbelievable, but it's what we saw, and what was causing all the weirdness that early spring just about 2 years ago. That's not a parrot. Like many habituation reports I've read and heard, mine too started with a spouse that was somewhat skeptical at first. Ha! And of course, the crazy sounds in the wee hours of the night, usually just before dawn. I was never a believer in Bigfoot until that point. As a matter of fact, I never really gave or paid much attention to the whole thing one bit. I do now, And for good reason. I saw two of them, literally with my own two eyes. I saw these animals. But as I said, it started out with some crazy sounds at night. And one other thing that had me really starting to wonder what in the world was going on around the property. But let me start with the sounds. As I stated earlier, it was a couple of years ago, spring in fact, literally the first week if I remember correctly. I was still working at a local lumber mill at the time, about 1 year from retirement, when I noticed the strange sounds at night and into the early morning hours around the property. We live right smack in the middle of a hilltop about 4 miles up into the hillside of Roseburg on 5 acres of some pretty pristine property, if I do say so myself. We have lived here for just over 30 years, the wife and I. It was quiet up until that point. Well, other than some mountain lions screaming occasionally, as they do live up this way, a few, but not many. But I was getting home that first morning of the weird sounds, actually, even earlier than usual. I had some vacation weeks stored up and was kind of forced to use 1 or 2 of them, and I could head home early that day, or still night, if you will. It was about 4 a.m. It was still very dark outside when I pulled up the driveway and parked in front of the garage. I stepped out, walked up to the porch. I recall to smoke a cigarette when I heard it. It was as if someone was just playing around, hooting or whooping up the north side of the hill just past my property, I'd say. It was that woot woot sound people have shared, except it was just weird sounding. When you really do hear it for the first time, you get what they are saying when they say it's just, well, weird. I stepped off the porch and walked to the side of the house and looked in the direction it was coming from. There are no neighbors there for a half a mile, just hills covered in pine trees, oak trees, and thick brush. I left the sound as the sun started peeking out and headed inside for a couple of weeks off at that point. Gravel throwing. Gravel throwing? So 3 nights, roundabout there I'd say. That is when I heard gravel. Literally gravel hitting the side of the house one night. Now at the time I thought it could be some homeless folks from down the road. About a mile down the road was a place, someone's property, that was allowing a bunch of homeless folks to come and stay here and there at the time. Eventually, however, and for good reason, that was broken up by the sheriff's department in the county. Good riddance to them. Some were actually pretty dangerous folks, come to find out. But with my rifle in hand, I decided to let loose on the trespassers that be. Nothing. Not a peep or a sound. Not even a cricket was heard when I stepped outside. Someone was around, in the shadows and darkness of the tree line most likely, but someone I could tell was around. I could just feel it. I yelled that I would shoot them if they did not leave, and left myself heading back inside. No more gravel that night. But the next night and the following night again, the sound of gravel or a small handful of pebbles being thrown at the side of the house could be heard. The last night I was pretty done with it all and fed up, to say the least. It was my vacation and I was being irritated by who I thought was a homeless person or two, vagabonds, probably young folks with nothing better to do, throwing gravel at my house. Yeah, I'm crabby like that. But I was wrong, and that third night I'd learned I was most likely dealing with something else, something that had me confused and bewildered, to say the least. That night, the third night, just after dinner, my wife said she could hear something running around outside through the bathroom window. She was unsure if it were an animal or a person. All she said is that she heard movement. She jumped into the shower, and that is when she heard some sharp whistling over the shower, over the falling water. She shut it off for a second and again heard what seemed to be a short, crisp, and clear whistle. Like me, she thought there were some folks on the property at that point and shut the window, and after her shower came down and told me what she'd heard. I went outside immediately. Once again, even though it was sunset at the time, the shadows of the tree line and hills round about me made it too dark to see who, if anyone, was out there. So I decided to wait them out tonight by the very same window in the bathroom. The bathroom window was on the second floor. It was small, one of those 12-inch wide things. There I would stand for a bit after the wife headed to bed to watch and listen for whoever it was coming around. And yes, I left the gun by the front door, loaded and ready. I started to get really tired about 2 hours in. Trust me, working at a mill forever and a day, I was used to standing for a long period of time. But I was getting tired and used to not being at work every day, even by then. As I dozed off again, while on my feet, mind you, I heard the gravel hit the wall just below me. Immediately, I was looking down the side of the house. It was dark, so seeing anything was difficult, especially with only one floodlight, which was on. It barely lighting up anything on the side of the house. However, there was enough light to catch the movement. However, it seemed pretty tall at first. I thought it was just the casting of their shadow. But after my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could see the figure moving, or better yet, saw it swaying back and forth. And it was really tall. I headed downstairs and slowly and quietly out the front door with my rifle in hand. I had no plans to shoot anyone, unless, of course, I needed to protect us from danger. I opened the door, peered out, stepped out onto the porch to look around the side of the house, and out into the tree line where the person was standing seconds before. No more shadow, no more person. The tree line was empty of everything but trees, and the 3/4 moon now shining through it. Just ugly and scary. It seemed to quiet down a bit for a few days after that. My wife, well, she was a bit scared that it was some bad folks from the property down the way that kept inviting them to stay there. Eventually, it was shut down, as I said, and there were some really bad folks staying there. However, that was not what was making nightly visits to our home. That was something completely different, and not even human, we'd learn. The second week of vacation, and the last until later that summer, we finally learned what was apparently hanging around and why it was hanging around. The gravel against the house stopped, but the whistles were back, and so was the shadow. I was up. I could not sleep that night and decided to get something to drink downstairs. The floodlight, I noticed, was on. It was a motion light, too. I forgot to mention that. But it was on, so something I knew was moving around outside. Deer, cougar, black bear, I don't know. And there it was again. The silhouette. That's what it was. It was like the silhouette of a large person in the tree line, just swaying back and forth. And it seemed to be facing away from the house, actually. I'm not sure how I could tell exactly, but it seemed as though they were looking down the hill, past the trees, and into a small open field that lay just beyond. Suddenly, they whistled and moved off into the tree line, and fast. That was the last I'd see and hear that night. Morning came, and I decided to take a look at the area and see if there was any evidence of that person still around. Maybe get an idea of what they were looking at down the hill. Well, I was stopped in my tracks by what I saw. Death. It was literally death spread out almost everywhere. A deer. Actually, a pretty large buck. The one I think I'd seen practically grow up around the area. Well, it was torn to pieces, and 2 legs and a chunk of his back was literally torn off and gone. Blood was all over the grass, and about 25 yards ahead of me was a tree that had bloodstains on it, as if something or someone smashed that deer right against it. It was a nightmare of a view. It was like wild animals tore the poor thing apart just for fun. However, parts were missing, so that was probably not true. But who or what does something like that, I thought? I don't know. I headed back inside and told my wife what I witnessed. And boy, was she frightened. And later that night, we both would be freaking out. They came, they saw, they left. We kept eyes in the back of our heads when we journeyed out into the backyard getting some gardening done the next day. I think I was staring off and up the hillside and into the trees more often than actually weeding. Eventually the sun went down. We ate. My wife went to bed as I sat by the window again in hopes of seeing who these people were, or possibly what animal was roaming my property, literally tearing deer apart. I would not believe it, Dave, even to this day. I still try and grapple with what I'd seen that night. We both do. It all started about 11 p.m. that very evening. No gravel against the house yet, just movement I could hear amongst the trees, like heavy footsteps walking briskly back and forth just inside the trees. It was as if they, or it, knew it could only go so far before the floodlight would be set off. That did not matter, though. The moon was finally full, and I could see very well into the night at that point. So well, in fact, that I finally tracked down the movement and finally saw the same large figure moving in the shadows as if it were bright as day out there. It was massive, and it, I could tell, was not a person, but it had the shape of one. Arms, legs, head, shoulders. It was nearly 8 feet tall, I reckoned. Dark hair as the moon was so bright I caught what seemed to be sheen, or shine, I suppose, off its long flowing hair. Hair, that is right, Dave. It was covered in it. I'm not sure if it were black or maybe dark brown, but it had a sheen to it, and the hair seemed 3 or more inches long on the arms as it moved through the trees, weaving itself in and around them. Grunting started at that point, a deep but short grunting here and there I could hear through the window. I decided to head downstairs at that point and get a better look. But then, before I could even move a single step, another grunt came from the other side of the house, a much louder one. Arr! To be honest, it was more like a sharp, low bark rather than a grunt. But I noticed that not only did I have a better vantage point where I was, but it was in fact another large creature that came out of the tree line from the side of the house, and this time I knew what I was staring at. Or what it was really, they were Bigfoot. So close to town, so close to me, I was freaking out at that point. Just looking at it, I knew I did not want these things around. And after seeing what those bare hands can apparently do to a large buck, I knew I had to somehow, some way, get rid of them. Maybe scare them off if I could. The rifleman. I finally reached the living room and my rifle, but not before I heard the most horrid screaming of my life. It was from those things, the Bigfoot, and a screaming deer. However, the scream from that deer lasted as long as it took to get out of its lungs. It was dead a second later. The Bigfoot, the second one, that came out of nowhere. Well, it had a doe in one of its hands. It wriggled, it writhed, tried to get away, and I was suddenly aware that my wife was watching all of this with me through the front window, and her face was seriously ashen with hands to mouth. The Bigfoot jerked its hand real fast, snapping the neck of that deer as it let out a sort of squeal and fell silent, not moving anymore. I had enough. My wife was really upset as she's sort of an animal lover. Me, I was just done with these large, scary, and ugly things roaming my property. I got to the front door, opened it slowly, raised my rifle, and I let off a shot. They screamed. Well, the one that I'd seen first did, and they both ran off, back up the hillside, into the darkness, faster than Jesse Owens himself. Bye-bye. I stopped you on your walk that day, Dave, because I wanted you to know why, or I wanted to know why you had that camera you talked into. I never thought I'd be telling you our encounter story at that moment. Then again, it is still hard to believe that we literally saw what we literally saw, and that we have a story to tell. Since that night, we'd never seen or heard anything again, not even gravel hitting our house. But that is our encounter story. Thanks, Carl and Danny.